Hello, welcome to TypeScript Basics. In this part, we are going to look at object literal. When we looked at class and objects, I mentioned that we can create object without even creating a class. So basically, to create object without class, we'll use object literal. Let's see how to create an object using object literal notation. I have VS Code open here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new object called John. So object is like any other variable. We can use the same mechanism we use to create any other variables. So I'm going to use this keyword called let to create a variable called John. And because this is of object type, we use curly brace notation to specify an object. So I'm going to have opening and closing curly brace. So this basically says that John is an object, but this is an empty object because it doesn't have any property or methods in it. But this is a valid object. So we can have an object without any properties or methods in it. So to see that this is actually an object, what I'm going to do, I'm going to print the type of this variable called John using a special operator called type of. So I'm going to say console.log type of, and then I'm going to say John. So this will actually print the type of this variable called John. So I'm expecting to see object printed on my console when I run this. As you can see here, it has printed object as type of this John. So this is a valid object. So to add properties and methods to this object called John, we are going to use something called key value pair notation. In TypeScript, object is simply a collection of key value pairs. The key is basically a string, and the value can be any value. You will separate key and value using colon, and you can separate key value pairs using comma. So if you add more than one key value pair, you will separate them using comma. So I'm going to create a new key called a name, and I'm going to use colon to specify its value. I'm going to say its value as John. So basically what I have done now is like I have created an object called John, and it has one property called a name, and its value is John. I'm going to create another key after comma, and I'm going to call it speak. So I'm going to define the speak as a function. So I'm going to say function, and the body of this function is going to say console.log speaking. So now this John has two keys. The first one is name, which has value John, and the second one is called speak, and its value is a function. As long as the key is a valid identifier in TypeScript, you can use dot notation to access them. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to access the name property in John object using dot notation. So if I run this, you'll be able to see the value John printed on the console. As you can see here, the value John is printed on the console. I can access the function in the same way. So I'm going to say speak. If I run this, it will actually print the whole function. It won't execute the function because I'm not invoking the function. I'm just accessing the value of this property called speak. As you can see here, it actually prints the function. It's not executing it. If you want to invoke it, all we need to do is we need to end it with pair of parentheses. So if I run this, it will run this function, print this value called speaking. Then it will also print undefined. As you can see here, it is printing undefined because when we invoke this function, it's going to print the speaking, and after that it's not doing anything, it just returns, and we don't have any explicit return value specified for this function. So by default it is going to return undefined, and that undefined is printed here. So if the key is not a valid identifier, let's say I'm going to start it with a number, one name, then I cannot access it using dot notation. So if I try to access, it will complain that it's not a valid identifier. So in this case, I can use the square bracket notation. So within square bracket, I'll specify the name of the key to access the value of this member. So if I run this, we'll see John printed on my console. As you can see here, it prints John. We can also change the value. For example, if I want to change the value of this property called one name to something else, I can do that. So I'm going to say John one name is equal to one John. So now if I run this, I'll see one John on my console because I have changed the value of this key called one name after it's been created. Similarly, if I want to attach a new property after it's been created, I can do so. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a property called toName. So this property doesn't exist on this object now, but still I can assign value to it. So when you assign value to it, it will create it. So in this case, it is going to create a new property called toName, and it's going to assign toJohn as a value to it. So if I access toName here and if I print its value, then it will print toJohn on my console, as you can see here. So this is object literal notation. That's it for now. I'll see you in the next video.